infusión. Ellos suben aquí, yo me pongo ahí y tú te quedas aquí.
Sí, señor.
Y tú quedas muy bien.
Prendiamo gentilmente posto, grazie. Siete quasi perfettamente bravi, ma please sit down.
One minute. 11:35, Andrea.
35 di solito.
No, 5 minutes late.
No, okay. 5 minutes late is good. No, we start with 15 minutes. So.
No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yes, but I think from Milan. Milan is not. In Milan is normal Europe, so 5 minutes. But I'm sorry.
Vas a explicar ma ci doveva essere il musicista. Non c'era il musicista. C'era il musicista che doveva. E dove sei andato? Non me lo penso. No, nothing. Only at the end.
Okay. All right. So we are going to start the last part of this session. And as you see in the program, the next speaker, the next session was Dr. Kathy Foley. Unfortunately, Kathy cannot be here with us for her family health reasons. And we will have the presentation from Kathy given by Professor Jim Cleary. And I'm happy to introduce Jim. He's an Australian-trained medical oncologist and palliative medicine physician who has been in the US for 24 years. He has not lost his Australian accent, though. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Wisconsin Carbon Cancer Center, where he leads the Pain and Policy Studies Group, WHO Collaborating Center. And for the last 20 years has been a leader in improving the global access to morphine. And if you have ever seen data on the consumption of opioids and the graphs that most of us use, they all come from Jim and his group. Jim will start in a new position as Director of Supportive Oncology at Indiana University in July. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Liliana. Palliative care has always been part of my professional life. My mother was a hospice nurse when I was in high school. When I was a medical student, she gave the first dose of oral morphine in Adelaide, Australia. As a medical student, I worked in Calcutta with Mother Teresa for 3 years, and it is where I met my wife. I have much to thank Mother Teresa. It is she who told my wife to marry me when I proposed to her. So it really is a great honour to be giving this talk on behalf of Dr. Foley today. Whatever you like are my ideas, whatever you don't like are Dr. Foley's ideas. But Dr. Foley is a member of the Academy and has really been a great leader of palliative care both in the United States and around the world, and she is a member of the Academy. And I would like to compliment, praise, commend Monsignor Paglia for leading, directing the Academy to address this important issue. Thank you, Monsignor. So, I managed to squeak in the question mark here, David, and ask the question, does palliative care improve medicine? And it is what we will address today. In the United States, death talk is not popular. The Americans have a saying, give me liberty or give me death. For Americans, death is always a second choice. But I remind you that even in the United States, 100% of Americans die. See, it took a while in the Italian, eh? Even the Institute of Medicine has been addressing this over a number of years. And I commend these reports to you, that they're very significant reports addressing the issues that go on. Patients and families with life-limiting illness face enormous challenges. Poor care coordination, poor communication. Healthcare is the most common cause of bankruptcy in the United States. The most common cause of bankruptcy in the United States. And there is inadequate symptom control and psychological support. They have defined that there is an aging population with chronic illnesses. There are an expanding number of medical, surgical, pharmaceutical and device innovations that prolong life, sometimes only months. There is increasing prevalence not only in the United States but around the world, and particularly in Africa and Asia, of non-communicable diseases, especially cancer. And there are spiralling healthcare costs, which even in a country like the United States is resulting in great inequity and access to care. One of the challenges, and I think David raised this in terms of society and medicine, is that there has been a real medicalization of death. In the United States, it most commonly happens in intensive care units. There's questions about patients' rights and bioethics, and increasingly, and particularly in states in the United States, there is discussions on euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. There is a real lack of guidelines to help us, and there is this term technological brinkmanship. I'm not sure how that's going to translate, but we'll see. This comes from Daniel Callahan, who is the founder of the Hastings Center reports. This is the unbridled use of technology that has taken over much of healthcare. It neglects the care of the person. And who are the victims of this brinkmanship? Really whole person care, patient-centered care are the victims as we move forward. In our enthusiasm to cure, we forget to care. So Callahan recommends the need to support the care of the dying through healthcare professional education, policies, as Marie-Charlotte mentioned, model programs, and a broad public education, not just physicians. The community needs to know about and what palliative care is. So here is the definition from 2002, which has already been shared with you, and to look at some of the aspects: pain relief, affirming life and regards dying as a normal process. The 2002 definition brought in the word intends. The earlier ones didn't have it. But by intention, we neither propose to hasten or postpone death. It helps patients and families live as fully as possible and helps the family to cope. David talked about palliative care and how it can improve society in general. But he also has spoken that palliative care has encouraged medicine to be gentler in its acceptance of death. Dan Somasi has also looked at this. Palliative care emphasises a biopsychosocial spiritual approach to care. It helps patients and families set goals to care about difficult topics and enables better coordination of care to navigate care plans. Phil Larkin, who you will hear from later on today about Europe, has used some of the metaphors that palliative care adds to medicine: being present, tending to or holding. And my wife is a hospice chaplain, and the children often speak about the fact that what she really does is hand-holding. But that sense of touch that is so important. Nurturing, looking at life through a patient's eyes, walking through their shoes, in their shoes, witnessing and compassion. So accompanying the dying has very many dimensions. The need to be present, providing unconditional support and solidarity, helping patients achieve a sense of completion in life, and finding opportunities for reconciliation, forgiveness, intimacy, and peacefulness. And this really becomes important as we look at people around the world. It's not just for people in the high-income countries, the global north, as David referred to it. This is for all people throughout the world. We need to develop the evidence base to bring about this practice. And there are a number of efforts around the world actually addressing this now. Collaborative research networks, Europe, United States, now growing in Africa and Asia. We're using standardized collection tools so we can make comparison, and we're establishing registries so that we actually know what is happening around the world. But I think, as David said it very importantly, patients don't necessarily care that much about, and Eduardo mentioned this as well, patients don't necessarily care that much about indicators and other things. They want care, compassion, and that is something we need to provide. So the evidence: palliative care increases patient time spent at home. Patient and carer satisfaction. Eduardo mentioned sitting down with your patients. Patients think you spend longer in the room if you sit down, even though you don't spend any more time. It's an amazing concept. So why we wouldn't sit down? Improved symptom control, reduced inpatient days, which in particularly in the expensive healthcare of the United States is a huge cost saving, reduced overall costs, and patients are more likely to die where they want to die. There's improved communication and decision-making with the involvement of palliative care, improved mood and reduced symptom burden, and there's some evidence that there may be an improvement in survival. But I worry that if we focus too much on that, we're joining the industrial medical complex, which puts all focus on living as long as we possibly can, rather than quality of life. And we show that earlier to referral to hospice can actually be a soft cost saving in the United States. Palliative care allows patients to, and Kathy used the word to, I changed it to with. I think that is the language we have to change. It's not talking to patients, it's talking with patients. And that is something palliative care can bring to medicine. In our own hematology ward at the University of Wisconsin, I'm often accused of raising the question of death and dying with bone marrow transplant patients. I walk in and ask the question, what is your biggest fear? And what do most patients say? I am worried I am going to die. Would you like to talk more about this? And they say yes. And I am accused of raising the death and dying question. It is the elephant in the room that we are showing to other clinicians. Palliative care allows healthcare professionals to work in teams with unconditional positive regard for each other. We learn communication skills and model compassionate behaviour. I want to refer you to this particular IOM report in 2001, which talks about the skills required to practice palliative care. Most of us think that palliative care is just care of the imminently dying, the last one. But there are so many skills that we need to bring to the table, and this report highlights them. We're going to hear more about communication in the next speaker. But I think this is an important aspect if we look forward to the results of this study from Boston. And what it actually did was take people with metastatic lung cancer and colon cancer, and it asked them what were their expectations. And here is the summary, and as I'm getting old, I have to put on my glasses to read it. In this treatment, 90% of the patients thought cure was somewhat or very likely, whereas 74% of the oncologists said cure was unlikely or very unlikely. We are not communicating in medicine, in oncology, the goals of therapy. And this is really something important that I think palliative care can actually do. Whoops, yep. In the United States, there is this discussion, I think a discussion around the world. Scott Murray has led this initiative on primary palliative care. We need to teach all primary care providers a basic concept of palliative care. But we also need specialist palliative care for the difficult cases. But I, for one, don't want to see every patient who is approaching the end of life. I think it is a change in the culture of medicine that we need to bring about, that this is something that we do in terms of medicine. There are increasing certification programs around the world for multidisciplines. It's not just physicians, nurses, social worker, chaplaincy, and I understand there are a large number of chaplains here, and I welcome you all to this meeting, such a crucial component. My wife said I had to say that, so... There is European certification programs, and these are all country-specific, but as we amalgamate more in regions, they are becoming region-specific as well. In the United States, the Joint Commission now has advanced certification for palliative care, which is based on consensus guidelines about what constitutes palliative care. We now have multiple textbooks on palliative care. And it's interesting, when I first moved to Wisconsin, studies showed that most medical textbooks and nursing textbooks did not even mention palliative care. That's the 90s. Now we have these wonderful textbooks that actually consider this. And we have an ever-growing number of journals across the board that address palliative care. Sometimes I worry that there are too many journals and I can't keep up with them all. We have guidelines across multiple disease. And even a number of us have just come from India, where in India the Palliative Care Association is working with neurology and intensive care specialists to bring about guidelines and changes in the way this is practiced in India. We need to address multiple populations and pediatrics, geriatrics, the developmentally delayed, lesbian, gay and transgender communities, sex workers. We sometimes use the word addicts, but the WHO would ask us to use the term dependency syndrome. There are real connotations, stigma associated with addiction, and also prisoners. But this is something that we talk about as being accessible in high-income countries, but we know across the world that many people don't have access to palliative care and pain relief. And this comes from a campaign in the Ukraine, which talks about that the 50 milligrams daily limit of morphine is not enough, and that this is the equivalent of torture. And the UN Human Rapporteur for Human Rights has talked about this in terms of the lack of access to opioids as being torture of our patients. The Lancet Commission was released in October of last year and will be formally released in April, and this is, I think, a huge document which really takes monstrous steps forward in addressing the abyss that we face in access to palliative care. It's often seen as second-class care, active therapies for the rich and morphine for the poor. And we even see that within countries. If you have enough money to actually go to a private hospital, you get the latest chemotherapy. Chemotherapy that now may cost $100,000 a month, even though it only provides some months of benefit. We have to be careful that we don't advertise our own cost savings to healthcare as a way of rationing care. For some, it is a vehicle for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. well, people die when they're getting palliative care. Why don't we just facilitate this and rush it forward? And there's also the concern has been mentioned that we become just another specialty rather than really changing the culture of medicine. As Francis has said, it is the experience of the truly human attitude of taking care for one another, especially those who suffer. It is a testimony that the human person is always precious, even if marked by illness and old age. Indeed, the person under any circumstances is an asset to him or her and to others, and is loved by God. To finish with the words of Daniel Callahan, there is peculiar irony in the contention that in cases of severe suffering, our human dignity can only be achieved by having another person kill us or providing us with the means to kill ourselves. It is a way of saying that we cannot achieve dignity on our own in some circumstances, but must turn to the community to make it possible, at least to one other person to make it physically possible, and society more generally to make it legally possible. Yet it is a strange kind of community that would require consensual homicide to realize its members' individual dignity. Very powerful words. What I think we need to do is tell stories. We need to tell stories about the patients that we care for, and these are some examples of some stories. This is Life Before Death. Michael and Susan Hill have put together this series of videos which address this very importance. They also did this Little Stars for pediatric palliative care, telling the story of how important this is. It is demonstrating to the world, to our colleagues in medicine, to our administrators, our policymakers, that we can actually bring about this restoration of dignity to people wherever they are in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to take the presentation of Cathy Foley and to introduce also your points in your talk. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Christopher. As we have seen, palliative care needs awareness. Professor David Clark told about that. This is because this topic is here. Palliative care requires communication. The topic will be presented by Christopher, that is a member of the Department of Health Policy from Springer Medicine Editorial. Thank you for your talk.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, palliative care needs communication. Communication between healthcare professionals, and politicians, between healthcare professionals and patients. If we talk about palliative care, communication is needed everywhere. I think we are a bit under pressure. There's not really much time to discuss all the interesting facts we've heard about this morning, so I would like to speed up a bit and give you some ideas about only one, but in my eyes, very important problem. How can we improve the knowledge among the public about what palliative care is and the benefits it can offer patients and health systems? And how could we get the journalists on side, especially newspaper journalists, to help us make things better? What we know is that medical and health issues in the media are often highly relevant at a personal level to the general public because issues have distinct effects on individuals, on families, and well-being. Let me give you some examples about media coverage and palliative care, German examples. In Germany, the legal claim of specialized outpatient palliative care exists.
Something with your slides. Can you see?
I have no slides at all.
Okay.
So it's okay. Thank you. Let me give you some examples about the situation in Germany. In Germany, the legal claim of specialized outpatient palliative care exists since 2007. But the ambitious goal of full coverage in people's homes has still not been achieved. People who decide to die at home are still at a great disadvantage when it comes to receiving palliative care, especially in rural areas. The problems of palliative situations in life are not highlighted enough within society in general. There is a requirement for increased availability of information. Once informed, consumers want to be able to have access to palliative care if they need it. Once informed, consumers say they would be very likely to consider using palliative care if they or their loved one, their relatives, had a serious illness. Last week, we had the yearly Congress of the German Cancer Society. And once again, speakers pointed out, 11 years after the legal claim, there are still too many people who wish to die at home but don't have any chance. We have the law here and reality on the other side. The final day of the Congress was Saturday. But if you would have tried to find anything about the problem in nationwide German newspapers, just like Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Die Welt, or Süddeutsche Zeitung, you would have found nothing at all. The media doesn't care. In my eyes, it's a very important problem. The media won't care. It doesn't mean that we cannot find stories about PC in German newspapers, but they are often highly politicized and far removed from reality. A second example, not about palliative care, but comparable about cancer and the end of life. In summer 2016, the German TV and radio presenter Miriam Pilau died at the age of 42 years. She was very popular in Germany. In 2008, a breast cancer had been found. She could defeat him. That's what the media told. In 2012, she became mother. In March 2016, she professed to be previously diagnosed with lung cancer. Also, this disease seemed defeated. In early summer 2016, she published a book, and the key message was, "I have beaten cancer." Interviewed by a German radio station, she said, "I am healthy, you can say that. The word miracle was at my doctor's because it was an absolutely improbable development. According to statistics, it would not give me today." 2 or 3 weeks later, Miriam Pilau died, and the whole nation asked, how could that happen? What went wrong? For maybe 2 or 3 days, the story of Miriam Pilau was the most discussed news information in Germany. And not only that, the media spoke about women with metastatic breast cancer. Experts explained the problems of these women are totally different if you compare their situation with women who for the first time have been diagnosed with breast cancer. A lot of basic information about women who have usually the impression that they are lost, that nobody cares about them. Australian singer and actress Kylie Minogue was a superstar with the world at her feet. I'm sure you know her. When 10 years ago, at the age of 37, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. News coverage caused an unprecedented increase in bookings for mammography in Australia later. A discussion started if health advocates should develop anticipatory, this is a difficult word for me as German, anticipatory strategies for responding to news coverage of celebrity illness. I personally think that it really could be useful to discuss this strategy. This might be really strange for you, I know, but we have to really look for ideas to communicate about the problem. And now that would be my key message. We have to learn that it is not up to us to make the rules of the game. It is the media that makes the rules. There is often a dissatisfaction about media coverage on the part of medical researchers and practitioners. They tend to compare the style, the tone, and quality of media stories with those of articles in medical and health research. Information in medical and health scientific journals is based on scientific communication logic. But what's the idea of journalism? I found a good explanation from British communication scientists, and they said the logic of news is to report on contemporary events, developments, debates, and conflicts in society. It is concerned with what is really new, what affects the public, and whether social institutions are effectively addressing public challenges. It has a critical stance towards all authorities, including science, medical and health institutions, and its logic is based on holding power to account and finding and reporting different perspectives on issues. The style of presentation in media is designed to be engaging, lively, and entertaining. What does the media like? The media likes stories with audience appeal. The media likes issues that stimulate debate, controversy, or conflict. It likes stories that create higher ratings and larger audiences. It likes fresh angles or twists on issues that will attract public interest. It likes accurate background information. That's very important. What do the media dislike? They don't like covering old topics. Palliative care tomorrow in the newspaper? No. We had that last week. We had that 2 weeks ago. Not that time. We won't have it. That's how media works. The media dislikes duplicating stories reported by competitors. I think this is clear. The media dislikes poorly written, spammy press releases. The media dislikes receiving numerous calls when on deadline. And speaking with journalists, get to the point. Most of them are always under pressure. And they won't like people who persist when a story idea is rejected. They won't like organizations that believe their story is interesting simply because it is theirs, or that convey the attitude that the importance of the story is obvious. We will leave the Congress tomorrow, and we all know how important palliative care is, but it means nothing. Media of the world, please help us, because we know we have important things to say. We know it, you have to do it. It won't work like that. It's up to the journalists to decide whether things are important or not. Quite a few ideas to social media. Social media have created global networks with immense power to quickly spread information, mobilize high numbers of people behind a cause. This technology can also be used by health professionals, and it is used already, to improve patient-physician interactions, enhance patient motivation, drive awareness, provide accurate information, raise timely issues, facilitate the exchange of ideas, frame and reframe health-related questions, engage a larger community. The online world is alive with discussions, comments about the topics of illness, disease, hospitals, death, and dying. There will be an impact on the way terminally ill patients and their families approach the last years, months, and weeks of their lives, and how they might expect palliative health and social care. We know that there are inherent challenges with the use of social media, but there are also major opportunities. What we need are careful discussions. How can the media help to disseminate the palliative care message to a global audience? There is no silver bullet to success. I don't know if that's the correct translation. The German word would be Königsweg, royal way. There's no royal way to success. It takes time and strategy. There is still a long road to go. I'm at the end of my short presentation, and you might think it was very negative, maybe. Is there really no chance to work together with newspapers? I think there are a lot of chances, as long as you understand their rules. Some final ideas: if you try to get in contact with the newspaper, find the journalist who is responsible for healthcare. That makes things easier, but avoid frauds, as I have mentioned. And there are a lot of chances to get in contact with local newspapers. We found out that these newspapers, local newspapers, are much more open for story ideas that could be a good chance to communicate things about palliative care. Newspapers help to communicate about palliative care, yes, but there are much more other, maybe easier ways. Thanks a lot.
So if you have any questions for the last two speakers, please raise your forms so that we have somebody to collect them for Professor Cleary and Christoph.
So we have now time for discussion. I asked Professor David Clark to be here and all the speakers. Meanwhile, I can say something about the talks that we have this morning. Eduardo Bruera remembered us that there is a huge evidence that palliative care improves the symptoms of the patient. We need palliaction, not only words, we need money. David Clark explained about the public awareness and the social awareness that is needed in palliative care. Marie-Charlotte Bouard talked a little bit about the house, the new palliative care framework perhaps in the future about public health and the house of palliative care. Jim and Cathy Foley explained us about how palliative care improves medicine. Palliative care is better medicine. And finally, Christopher Furr explained us that we need to understand the rules of the media. The media loves the stories. The media loves a live discussion. So it's your time now. We have several questions on the table, and we are going to give the questions to the speakers. Some of the questions are for only one, and other questions are for all. Liliana, if you want to start.
Here are the questions for all. Yes. So the way we will do this is Carlos will read those questions that are put forward to the whole panel, and then we'll give a chance to the speakers to respond to those questions. Also, the speakers will address the questions that were personally sent specifically to them. So, do you want to start with one of the general questions, Carlos?
Yes. The first question to all is telling like that. David remarked that the public is interested in end-of-life question and palliative care. What should we do to inform the public in the right way? What should we do to inform the public in the right way? Perhaps the first speaker that can answer is Christoph. This question is a question for all the speakers. Then all the speakers have to give us a brief comment on that. But I invite to Christoph to answer first. The question is, what should we do to inform the public in the right way?
First, I have to say that the quality of my possibilities to answer in English will be much lower than when I hold the speech. And the reason is I had a corrector. That was my wife. She's an English teacher. So yeah, I might have a lot of questions. So increase the public awareness. I think there are many possibilities. I explained what might be possible with newspapers, but I think we have to see for the future the possibilities that social media bring. I think that might be the key to develop more global understanding. And I know that a lot of things are actually happening. I know that there are a lot of healthcare workers who try to communicate, and I think what we need is communication. We need find ways to try to find our strategies to develop things.
I'm going to take a different approach here and suggest that the medical community has to take leadership, or clinical community. If you look at the press releases that come out from cancer centres, it's about the new drug. 3-month survival advantage, but it's the new cure. I can get new research dollars and I can get philanthropy. I can wipe out cancer at MD Anderson. This is the publicity and the press that we have. We as a health profession need to change this conversation. One of the examples I recall is Robert Buckman, who is an English-Canadian oncologist. He wrote a book about cancer and had a sealed section on palliative care and death and dying. Sealed. So if you bought the book, you had to break the seal to read the section. He was not aware of a single reader who did not open that section. So I think we, as the medical community, are often more afraid of this than the actual public are. We need to take some leadership.
I think I have the trend to agree completely with Jim in terms of the fact that we as a medical and academic community have not exerted the leadership we need to exert in the care of the person who is ill. And therefore our discourse has been disjointed and purely articulated because we have not assumed the leadership in medical schools, in universities, and in major healthcare facilities to make this care available. So I think one of the pieces, the great opportunities we have, and I think that's, I would hope that the Pontificia Accademia per la Vita is going to have this enormous role in every aspect of Catholic healthcare universities, Catholic universities, and essentially the world healthcare, in making sure that this discourse occurs in every single place where diseases are treated, to make clear that persons are bringing those diseases. I think from there on, the relationship with media should become very fluent and very appropriate, but we have had an enormous lack of leadership. My generation has failed to make this part of organized medicine, organized academia, organized thinking, and therefore it hasn't permeated to the media and to the public.
Just one sentence. I think this is really a shared responsibility, and I would take my part as a UN agency. I think we have to benefit from all opportunities to put the palliative care issue in the global debate, because this is a responsibility of the global community, and this is also an issue of human rights. So I take my part as a UN civil servant and think it's definitely something we have to do in order to improve the understanding of what we mean with palliative care.
So many things here. I mean, the first one about the question. I think there's something flawed about it. Part of the problem is, how do we inform the public? Let's talk more about how do we better understand the public and what their concerns are. I think the mantra is, and we've heard a lot already this morning, in the opening section there were a lot of words like misconception and linguistic flaw was another one. These are not misconceptions or linguistic flaws, they're legitimate differences within societies. And I think we ignore that at our peril. The palliative care community needs to engage in debate, not be informing other people about what it does and why it's right in its approach. The second thing is, I think it's actually the case at the moment that there's a huge amount of material in the mass media, the print media, and in the social media about death, dying, bereavement, loss, illness, suffering, and palliative care and assisted dying. The idea that there's no discussion in the media, to me, doesn't square with the way it's currently perceived by me. In my group, we edited a social science magazine, a free online magazine called Discover Society. I recommend you all to look it up. For this month, the whole issue is devoted to issues of death, dying, and bereavement, end-of-life issues. The editors have already told me that the amount of read traffic onto the site has exceeded any other issue they've had in the last 5 years. We have, in the United States, many doctors that have written about end-of-life issues. Interestingly, Eduardo, not from within the palliative care community. It's tended to be surgeons and others who've drawn attention to these issues among the general public. But I was very encouraged just before Christmas when Dr. Catherine Mannix, who'd worked for many years in the hospice in Newcastle in the north of England, has written a book aimed at the general public about her experience. And I think we need more of this. I wouldn't wholly agree with Eduardo when he says that his generation has failed, and I've written at some length about this in my book on the history of palliative medicine. Where I think it has failed is in finding simple narratives to engage public interest. And perhaps for understandable reasons, palliative medicine as a specialty has been down a rabbit hole, doing research to influence other doctors and funders and policymakers, but losing sight of the thing that Cicely Saunders always regarded as very important, which is communicating with the wider public at the same time.
Thank you, David.
Now we are going to give the floor to one of the speakers, and we'll do a general question and specific questions. And we'll give the chance to Dr. Marie-Charlotte Bouzou from WHO to respond to the questions addressed to her.
Thank you, Liliana. Well, first, I have to say that some comments are actually in agreement with the house analogy. So this, to be honest with you, occurred to me recently. So I would like to benefit from your input if you want to elaborate a little bit more on this analogy. I have two groups of questions. The first one is related to the provision of palliative care at an early stage of the disease. In particular, one question regarding elderly. I think it's definitely a group of people we have to consider, and we are planning actually to work particularly on this group of patients. Another question is also, I would say, similar in the fact that we also have to take into account people before expressing pain or suffering, so in advance, to anticipate somehow the needs. I think that the two questions are related, because definitely this is something we need to put in place with training and also with this organization of health services in order to promote this culture of accompaniment. It's not only to respond to a critical situation and sometimes too late to provide the good answer to the need. So I would agree in the fact that it has to be discussed with teams working on the curative aspect of the disease. Actually, I will take the opportunity to make an announcement. I have with me some communication tools. In one of them, we are describing this model, which is very well known, where palliative care are implementing at the same time of curative treatment. So it's not stopping curative treatment to initiate palliative care, but it's really integrating both to answer needs on time and eventually before entering in a situation of suffering which is difficult to control. I have another group of questions related to countries where there is no healthcare systems, a specific question related to countries affected by Ebola, and also a question related to the need to discuss with health authorities and dialogue with the different political authorities in order to put in place these programs. Of course, in many countries, it's very difficult to introduce a new component when the health system is weak. Now, something which is important in the resolution adopted by the World Health Assembly is the fact that palliative care has to be considered within universal health coverage. So, essential care. And I think this is a strong message, particularly for NGOs or people in the field in their dialogue with national authorities, because palliative care is not something you have to consider when everything else is in place. It has to be considered from the very beginning of the development of the health system. And a good understanding of what is palliative care should allow that. Now, with the example of Ebola, I would like to relate this to the work we are conducting regarding palliative care in humanitarian crisis. This is definitely a huge issue, and you will have very soon, I hope by June, a WHO publication on this. It's particularly crucial because obviously these situations are situations of huge vulnerability, and also because of access to medicines. It's very common to have absolutely no opioids or control medicine available in this kind of situation. So there is a lot of issues to be addressed in this specific context. I think we have initiated a good collaboration in the organization with colleagues working on emergencies. As you know, this is also a priority of the organization in order to improve this situation. But I would say in conclusion that the approach we want to take for the strengthening of palliative care globally is to be sure that it's actually, as indicated in the title of this meeting, everywhere, even in the most critical situation. And to do so, there is still a lot of awareness raising to be done with national authorities and with the global community. I think this is more or less what I was asked. And obviously, I'm here until tomorrow evening, so I would be happy to have more personal exchange if needed.
Thank you, Marie-Charlotte. The next question is for Professor David Clara and Dr. Eduardo Bruera. The question is more or less, some people understand palliative care as to short the end or to hasten death. There is a misunderstanding with the definition of palliative care. For some people, means that could be this one explanation for cultural resistance to palliative care?
I think the cultural part I'm going to give to David because he's more into culture. But I think technically I think that is clearly one of the issues that are concerning. When people Google palliative, they get hospice, end of life, and so on, and many times the patient and the family are afraid of what that means. So working at integrating palliative care throughout the trajectory of illness is one of the great opportunities we have to make sure that people understand that we are fully integrated. I think several of the presenters today have made the point, fully integrated throughout the trajectory of the illness of the patients. That's a wonderful opportunity to dispel some of the myths. Perhaps one of the challenges we have in the healthcare system is, since a very small percentage of patients in the rich countries and a dismal percentage of patients in the poor countries have access to palliative care, then how do we make this available earlier to that number of patients? And it will require a combination of considerable amount of palliative care developed and delivered by the disease management groups, and the palliative care team becoming involved at any time when things do not go well with the primary care delivered. So it needs to be something that the disease management groups take ownership of, and that we are there to teach them how to do it and to take care of those patients who are not getting any better, not at the end, but at any time.
I think part of the difficulty is just the sheer morass of terms that we're now faced with. Eduardo's written about the effects that you can have on referral to a service when you change its name from palliative to supportive, or vice versa. We've got an absolute mass of terms, and within palliative care now, a whole range of subspecializations that I've been trying to keep track of. There's Geri Pal, there's Onco-Pal, there's a vast range of them, rehabilitative, palliative. We are confused. It's no wonder that other people are. When there was a famous novel written by Thomas Hardy called The Mayor of Casterbridge, and at the beginning of the book, the main character says to a local person, "Can you tell me the way to Casterbridge?" And the local person says, "I wouldn't start from here." Has it come through yet? And I think that's the position we're in at the moment. We have a massive terminology that we debate endlessly and which further confuses the wider public. When Carlos's team did a study in Spain on the message of palliative care, there were some interesting results. One was, again, it was a soccer analogy, Eduardo. A team that wasn't doing very well was described in one article as, last week it was in the ICU, but now it's heading for the palliative care unit. People are confused by these terms. I think we need to simplify our language and become much clearer about the message. But in fact, most of the field is intensifying the complexity, not simplifying it. And I think that's very, very worrying. I mean, I've got a question here about the difference between hospice and palliative care. But there are many, many debates about what palliative care is. If you look up palliative care in Google, it takes you straight to Wikipedia. You'll see there an American definition of palliative care that probably is not recognizable to many people who work in a hospice. So I think we need to have a very, very serious debate about the profusion of terms, the values that go with them, and stop blaming the general public for misunderstanding something that we are not clear about ourselves.
Can I add to that? And I think just mentioning the US definition, it has the word specialized in it. Specialized. I would be very comfortable with a special form of care, but as soon as we use the word specialized, we're actually creating a specialty, and it's not the purview of the general medical community. Serious illness, what is the definition of a serious illness? These are all the I would agree with you, David, the language is a morass. and we have to work to correct that.
Okay, we go on then also to the next step, which is the individual questions. David, do you want to address the questions to you?
I'm not sure I can answer them. The first one is about the distinction between hospice and palliative care. I have tried to do this in a slide once or twice. In my talk, I was distinguishing between the field of biomedical specialization and the field of social movement. And I think hospice and palliative care illustrate this, that hospice has a history that grows out of a social movement, whereas palliative medicine has its struggles within the field of medicine in establishing itself as a specialty. What we know from public opinion surveys is that there's a higher understanding of the word hospice than there is of palliative care. Sometimes people put a hyphen in them to try and join them up. Another thing that interests me about the two words is, particularly the word hospice, is that it starts off as a noun. A hospice is a place, but it's also become a verb. It's a way of doing things. So it's a good illustration of this wider complexity of terminology. But I think there are differences, and I know that there are fears within the world of hospice, and the question alludes to this, that the medical field of palliative care will seek to somehow medicalize what goes on in the hospice. And that's a debate that goes on in many settings. Do you do blood transfusions? Do you use antibiotics? And so on. So that was one question that was for me. Another one that was about terminal sedation, whether it constituted some kind of form of an aberration or stealth euthanasia. I'm not too confident in my ability to answer that. But the questioner also says she was encouraged by Monsignor Paglia's clear distinction between palliative care and euthanasia. But I gave a talk at the Royal Society of Medicine a couple of weeks ago, and I argued there that palliative care has three potential orientations to assisted dying. One is complete rejection. The other is some form of accommodation. And the third is some form of integration. Historically, palliative care has opposed assisted dying, but the proponents of assisted dying haven't necessarily opposed palliative care, other than to argue that it isn't effective for everyone. There's a ground that shifted in Oregon, California, and other places where you see people working together to accommodate different views. There was a very interesting talk at the Royal Society of Medicine from a Californian primary care doctor who said that the change in the law there had improved the communications between people, specialists and non-specialists, and had in fact widened access to hospice. I suppose the example that interests people most in the European context is whether you can integrate the provision of euthanasia where it's legal to perform it with the provision of palliative care. And really the only example I think we have of that at the moment is in Flanders in Belgium. But I think these three positions of rejection, accommodation, and integration are where the discussion sits now between palliative care and assisted dying.
David, can I offer a fourth suggestion?
Okay, why not?
And I'm going to suggest deferral. And why do I question deferral? I actually think the discussion on physician-assisted suicide should only take place when the world's population has true and equitable access to palliative care. To be saying that people in Oregon who are more privileged get to have this discussion while 80% of the world suffers without access to morphine is really a discussion from privilege. And I think we should defer the discussion and have an open discussion once we have global access to palliative care of excellence.
So we also received a question at the last minute when Marie-Charlotte was presenting, and it's related to the position of WHO in regards to euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. So,
yes, quickly on this, as we were touching this issue, the question is formulated in Italian, but I think I can understand, about the position of WHO on assisted suicide. So quickly, this provides an opportunity to clarify two things. First, what is a WHO position? A WHO position is formally an agreement within 194 member states. And as Jim just mentioned, the priority for the global community in terms of public health is not this issue. The priority we have to face now is to provide good palliative care everywhere. So this is the reason why there is no position of WHO on assisted suicide. And if I may add my interpretation of the mandate of the organization, I don't think we will have a position on this issue in the future. Some of our member states, very few, have legislation on this. And actually, there's an important difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide in many aspects. But this is probably an issue which will never get a global consensus. So I think it's important to distinguish which can be discussed and maybe regulated at national level, and what is a global commitment. For the organization, it is clear that the priority and the global commitment now, it's actually a sort of emergency, is to provide access to good palliative care to everybody, everywhere.
Yeah, I have here three questions that are related between them. One is about, is for all speakers. I will ask to the speakers a brief answer because it's almost 3 questions. Then I will ask you to be short. The first question is about what is happening in the medicine, because you are treating the patient as a liver, as a heart, but when he or she is dying, then we treat the patient as a whole person. That's the first question. The second question is about the role of psychology and psychotherapy in the care at the end of life. And the third question is how a physician, a nurse, a professional can detect the spiritual needs in practice with a tool, with a conversation. Then 3 questions in 1. Who is the first? For instance, Jim, do you want to answer?
I'll take the spiritual needs, and Christina's going to talk more about this later on as well. But often it's just a simple question. I will ask patients, what is it that gives your life meaning? So a simple question that can actually ask and get to the roots of what gives people's life meaning. When we talk spirituality, it is not my role to preach, to convert, to change. It is to meet people where they are at. So I often use the words of Cecily Saunders, listen to your patients, they have the answers. Someone sent me a question to Eduardo saying, I don't think that existential suffering is the proper business of medicine. I actually think it is, but it's not just the physicians who are there to address it. That is why we have a team to address existential issues. And I have at times, as a physician, been involved in addressing those, but it's the importance of a team, particularly psychologists and chaplains. And maybe I've answered all 3 questions there, but thank you.
from the point of view of the media, we can answer some of these questions. Do you want to answer, Chris?
I think these were very medical questions. I'd like to talk once again about, there was a question, the use of social media to increase awareness of palliative care messaging. We know that there are really a lot of things happen in social media, discussions, comment about the topics of illness, disease, hospitals, death and dying, but to tell the truth, I can't see there is yet a basic idea of how we really can use social media to increase that awareness. I think that this is really a very important question. I have not a final answer.
Thank you. Perhaps about psychology and psychotherapies, Liliana can answer something.
Well, technically I'm not a speaker, so
but you are the expert, yeah.
I haven't practiced psychology in 20 years, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I don't think you can treat any patient in a fractured way. You have to treat the person as a whole. And the whole means the physical, the psychosocial, the spiritual, and the emotional aspects of the person, plus the family. Unless we address the care and the treatment protocols and the therapies that we apply to the whole patient, we won't deal with the existential suffering.
David, what about this question of to treat the heart or the lung or the liver in the face of the disease and to treat the whole person at the end?
Well, medicine has progressed by subspecializing, so that's part of the modern history of medicine. You first of all create a field of medicine and then you break it down into highly specialized areas of expertise. And in a way, palliative medicine is doing that a little bit already itself, as we've seen. There's people specializing in palliative care in heart failure and other conditions. This is a problem for medicine as a whole. But also where the boundaries of medicine lie, I think, is interesting. There was a beautiful poem once written by a Welsh doctor who's a very good writer, and the poem was called "Leave My Soul Alone." The patient was saying, you don't belong here. Treat my body, but my soul isn't your territory. And that's the point I think Jim was touching on. I think medicine needs a really serious conversation with itself about how expansive it wants to be. And part of me thinks that the public wants it to be rather mechanical and instrumental. It wants results and it wants them quickly and it wants miracles. We heard about that. The paradox is sometimes not that the person who's being cared for is complaining that their treatment is being medicalized, but that it's not medical enough.
Liliana, your turn.
So, as you can see, we lost one of the speakers. He has been taken away by aliens.
No.
He's talking to the media.
Yeah. He apologized because someone from the media is asking him. So he told me that, please.
Yes, he's talking to the media right now, which is important as well. So basically, what we will try to do is address some of the questions. Jim will address the questions that were sent to Eduardo and to himself as well. So Jim, you have the floor.
There is a question that has come up in the Italian healthcare system. Recent regulations do not consider palliative care units. Hospitals are not encouraged to have palliative care services, and there is no academic palliative care programs. Do you see this as a problem? Yes. That's a simple answer. But the suggestions, and that's the next question, what are the suggestions? I would actually say that the United States has been very slow in developing academic palliative care programs. In the United States, much the way Eduardo and David were talking, hospice, the modern hospice movement, grew outside of academic medicine. So there was a rapid growth. We now have some over 3,000 hospices, many of which are for profit. And it's really taken significant grant funding to change the culture of medicine, of palliative medicine, within medicine, healthcare in the United States. A lot of this was led by the Project in Death in America, which was funded by George Soros. They created academic leaders who got salary support to have time to bring about this change in culture. So that was that you had to buy clinicians' times to do this. And this included social workers, nurses, physicians. So I think that is one way of actually setting up a mentored program where people can bring about significant change within academic medicine. To do it without, always meet resistance. So that is one of the things that I particularly did in Wisconsin, find out what is important for the institution and actually bring about change. If education is important, attack the education. If research, attack the research. But you have to understand your institution, Eduardo's example, parking. But that's one of the things that we have to do, is understand our institutions to bring about change. And I think I've addressed the others.
Okay. I have a question for Marie-Charlotte and Jim. It's a very concrete question. Is how strong is about cannabis, about the use of cannabis? How strong is the scientific evidence of the use of cannabis in palliative care, and if so, in which conditions? In which conditions? Thank you.
I will give the Bill Clinton answer and say I did not inhale. To me, the evidence, and this is an interesting, there is indirect evidence now in the United States that the states that are actually using or have legalized or medicalized marijuana, cannabis, have actually had a decreased consumption in opioids. Now, that doesn't mean that all those people who are using the opioids were necessarily using them for the appropriate medical purpose. So that's a mixed answer. Do we have good randomized controlled trials that show the benefit of cannabis? No. Well, in actual fact, we do have some. There is some that are supported by pharmaceutical companies that have been done in Scotland, which don't actually show a real benefit in the treatment of cancer pain for some cannabis-like products, cannabinoids. I think we need more research done on this and the appropriate medicalization of it. Morphine, to remind you, is a natural product. So there is no reason that we should dismiss cannabis as potentially having benefit, but let's do the research and studies that show it. The problem that we face is there is a whole group of society, or two groups. There are those who want cannabis to remain a prohibited product. There are also those in society, and they come to the Commission of Narcotic Drugs in Vienna, and they want total liberalization of cannabis and many other products. They do not want the medicalization of marijuana. So that's the conflict. I think we need more evidence to truly show the benefit. Do I have problems with my own patients who suggest that they'll use a joint to feel a little better when they have advanced disease? I tell them it's not legal, but if that's their choice at the time and they get benefit, that's up to them.
Okay.
Okay. Just one sentence to say that I will defer the question. But before giving the floor to Liliana, I just want to say that at this moment, I don't think WHO is in condition to answer the question just for the reason Jim mentioned, the lack of evidence. I quickly mentioned that we are currently developing clinical guidelines for cancer pain treatment, and Jim is actually part of the expert group as the director of one of our collaborating centers. What we do in the organization is to wait for the scientific evidence, to consult with a group of experts before making recommendation to member states. In addition, in this particular situation, there is a number of legal issues that are in place in member states. So it would be particularly important to have very strong evidence to eventually change this legal situation. But I think it's a good illustration of how we work between the scientific community and the policy makers, making bridges to have informed decision and policy. But now Liliana will provide more information.
So I think it is important to understand the legal framework and the background. The cannabis, and the question is about cannabis or cannabinoids? It's cannabis, right?
Cannabis.
Cannabis. So the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which is the legal framework in which all these substances that have some potential for abuse are included in there. The cannabis and all its products were included in the strictest schedule of this convention. It means that all the member states of the United Nations have to adhere to that framework. That led to a lot of restrictions on the amount of studies, which is why we don't have the evidence at hand. Having said that, there is a committee within WHO, which is called the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, that is in charge of doing the analysis of the evidence and then making recommendations when we want a substance that has been demonstrated to have some capabilities or some pharmacological behavior that was not identified before, so that it's changing schedule. So it can make, the substance can be moved to a stricter or a less strict schedule. In order for WHO to be able to recommend that to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, it has to do a pre-review and then a critical review of a substance. And right now, the WHO is carrying on the critical review. A pre-review has been completed. The committee agreed that it merits, all the evidence merits a full critical review, and it takes 2 years to get the data in. But part of the problem is that because of the scheduling, that cannabis and all the products were set in the single convention, put all the researchers in a catch-22 situation, because there was no funding and you can't do the research because it's not allowed. But there was no funding because there was no research. So that's the situation we're trying to solve right now.
It's a very interesting example. The United States, or the states in the United States that have legalized or medicalized marijuana, have actually put the United States government in breach of the single convention. So there is actually this amazing conflict in law, international law, and how we advance this forward.
Quickly, please.
Totally different aspects, excuse me. Once again, to increase awareness. There is an idea that has not yet been discussed, and this is media campaigns. I mean, paid media campaigns. There are a lot of positive experience, media campaigns, for example, against smoking, healthy nutrition. So I think that could be really a good idea to discuss if we think about increasing awareness, to try how it works with the media campaigns. TV, social media, newspaper, that could be not a bad idea.
There is also a question for the academia. The person is asking about if this presentation will be online available for all. Father Andrea. Sí. Sí, la respuesta que me dice Father Andrea es las dos primeras presentaciones. Sorry. I was, estaba hablando en español. Sí, the answer is that the two first presentations are already available. The presentation of Monsignor Paglia and the Chancellor are already online today, and all other presentation will be available very soon, perhaps this week. Okay, it's time to close. It's time to close. So remember, understand the rules of the media. Palliative care improves medicine. The house of palliative care with all the actors in the windows, including patients and families inside. Professor De Vicar, remember us, palliative care need awareness, professional and social, and the awareness of the society. And Eduardo told us that there is huge evidence of that palliative care improves medicine. My last words are for thank you all of you for your participation. We had a lot of questions, and that's very good. This enriched these conversations here. And also thank you to all the speakers for the extraordinary presentation, and also to keep on time that session. Thank you very much to all of you.
Siamo perfettamente puntuali, grazie per la conduzione e ai relatori. E colgo l'occasione dell'ultima domanda per ricordare che l'Accademia ha un sito web ufficiale, academyforlife.va, ha un profilo Twitter, Pontacaldife. Troverete le fotografie di questo congresso nei prossimi giorni sulla pagina Flickr, e in questo momento siamo anche in streaming sulla pagina YouTube, cioè potete trovare tutti i vari materiali nei luoghi in cui ormai siamo abituati a cercare notizie e informazioni. La sessione pomeridiana inizia alle 14:30 puntuali. Abbiamo abbastanza tempo. Potete trovare, credo, molte soluzioni per il vostro pranzo, anche se state attenti che le trattorie romane possono essere pesanti talvolta nei tempi, talvolta nei costi, talvolta anche nelle calorie, quindi meditate bene sulla vostra scelta. Appunto, comunque, sia nella zona di Borgo Pio sia nella zona di Via Cavalleggeri credo che potete trovare diverse soluzioni veloci e semplici per rifocillarvi e ritrovare energie. Noi aspettiamo i relatori del congresso e i chairman di sopra invece al primo piano. Grazie ancora, ci vediamo alle 14:30.